What up folks, it's Alex here, and this is the Osmo Pocket. Now I've been using this tiny little camera to do some vlogs, to do some B-roll and that sort of thing for the past few months now. And I'm not afraid to admit, I'm quite a big fan of this tiny little thing. So in this video, I'm going to show you some quick tips and tricks that I've learned over the past few months using this thing, which should help you get the most out of this tiny little beast. So let's get straight to it, shall we? This is a super duper obvious one, but it's worth mentioning, and that is this. The data port at the front of your Osmo Pocket. I've seen people leaving this sticking out the side like so. If you pop your adapter out, swivel it round, plunk it back in, it'll sit flush on your Osmo Pocket. It won't be protruding out the side, you're not going to knock it, you're not going to catch it, you're not going to break it. Swivel it round, slide it in that way, much nicer. Tip number one, super easy and simple that one. Tip number two is another really obvious one, but again, I've seen people missing this one, and it's simply that front button. That button on the right hand side does multiple things, and you should use it more than you think. If you're in a menu system and you're scrolling through, let's say that you're changing your frame rate, so you slide over from the right, you select video, and then you select your video options, let's say 4K, 24 frames per second. You then don't need to keep flicking from the left to go back. If you simply push this button, it will take you straight back to the main recording screen. Now admittedly, that's a quick one. It'll only save you a second or two, but if you're always doing that, it can just make your life that little bit easier. And then, when you're actually recording or when you're out and about, if you push that button once, it will switch between photo and video mode. Quickly tap that button twice and it will recenter the gimbal. So if you're in follow mode and you've pointed it upwards or downwards and you want to just really quickly get it back to pointing forwards, get it to the center, give that one a quick double tap. And then tap that 3 times to switch between forward facing and selfie mode. So again, if you're vlogging, quickly record yourself, quickly flip it around and record whatever is going on ahead of you. Make use of that little button. It can actually save you quite a lot of time. Tip number 3. Get a grip. One of the Osmo Pocket's greatest features is also one of its greatest issues, in my opinion, and that's its size. Because it's so small, it can be a little bit difficult to grip. I don't have the biggest hands in the world, but I've got to admit, I do struggle with it. And on top of that, because it's so small and light, I actually find it quite difficult to move smoothly. If you're holding it really dainty, it's kind of difficult to get steady. And last but not least, and one of the worst things about it, is there's no tripod mount. And that's where a good quality grip comes in. And the one I'm using is the Polar Pro grip system. Now this one is really good. I'm really impressed with it because it's got a real nice thick grip on the back. It's got a rubberized texture, place for your finger and a place for your thumb around the front. It gives you much more to hold on to and it makes it that little bit heavier. You can steady it with 2 hands, you can get your steady shots and you don't feel like you're going to drop it. So it's a really nice solution. On top of that, there's 3 tripod mounts. There's 2 across the bottom, 1 across the top. As you can see on mine, I've attached a cold shoe mount so I can shove a microphone on this thing. And then this over on the left hand side is a grip for your phone. So if you do want to go out, you want to take some B-roll, you need to get a bigger screen, put your phone in here, it'll hold it steady, attached to the data port. Without a grip, attaching your phone to the Osmo Pocket is janky and it's just an accident waiting to happen in my opinion. I really don't like attaching my phone without the grip, and this solves all those issues. One quick downside I have to mention, you can't attach the DJI microphone adapter to the bottom of your Osmo Pocket and still use that tripod mount. You either have to use one or the other. Fortunately, they've thought of that, they've put one over here as well, so you can still use a tripod and a microphone. Job done. Really nice bit of kit. Now when you buy this grip, you actually get this with it. So this is the Osmo Pocket cage. And how it works is you put the cage on your Osmo Pocket, you slide your Osmo Pocket into the grip like so, tighten it up, and it's in there for good. It's not going anywhere, nice and secure. If you don't want to use the grip, you just want to use the Osmo Pocket on its own because you're going somewhere you want to travel real light, then you've still got this cage on it. And the cage itself has 2 tripod mounts, one on the side, one on the bottom. So you can still attach a microphone to this thing, you can still attach a tripod to it. It's just way more usable using this system. Polar Pro actually sell this cage on its own, but it's 25 bucks. You can get the whole grip system, so cage and the handheld grip, for 35 bucks. So it's a no-brainer, in my opinion. If you're looking for something like this, just grab the grip system rather than just the cage on its own, and then you get the best of both worlds. Really, really handy. Tip number 4. The Osmo Pocket is actually really good straight out of the box. You can leave it in auto and actually do quite a good job. But if you want to get the best footage, you're going to have to take over some of those controls yourself, and to do that, you need to activate Pro Mode. Now, Pro Mode gives you more access to some of the different frame rates, which we're going to talk about in a moment, and it also allows you to set your exposure, i.e. your ISO and your shutter speed manually, as well as being able to set your white balance. And to activate Pro Mode, simply swipe down from the top, scroll over a few times until you see the Pro icon, and then give that a tap and so that it's highlighted in white. And if you shoot back to your main screen here, you can now see that it says Pro in the top left hand corner. If you give that a click and then go to exposure, you can then click on the M to just go to manual, and from here you can choose your shutter speed on the left hand side and your ISO on the right hand side. Also, if you click on your Pro icon again here, you can enter your white balance, give that a click, you set it to auto, or you can choose your particular white balance as you need it. Enable Pro Mode, learn how all these settings work, and I guarantee you'll start to get better footage out of your Osmo Pocket. Tip number 5, shoot at 48 frames per second. Now this is going to be a controversial one, but hear me out. Now everyone generally on YouTube and in the world is advising people to stick to the 180-degree shutter angle, which, if you don't know, dictates that your shutter speed should be twice that of your frames per second. So if you're shooting at 24 frames per second, your shutter speed should be as close as you can get it to 1/48th of a second, which on the Osmo is 1/50th of a second. Now that is absolutely correct. It will get you the best looking, most cinematic footage with a nice amount of motion blur and all that sort of thing. But the problem is, if you're switching between 24 frames and then 60 frames per second to get some slow motion, it's a faff. So what I prefer to do is shoot at 48 frames per second and use a 360-degree shutter angle instead. So you shoot at 48 frames per second and then you'll set your shutter speed to 1/50th of a second. Now why do you do that? Well, it's simple and it's purely down to convenience. 48 frames per second is exactly twice that, is exactly double of 24 frames per second. So if you shoot at 48 frames per second at 1/50th of a second and put that footage onto a 24 frames per second timeline and play it back at real time, real speed, what your editing package will do is simply skip every other frame. So then you'll end up with 24 frames, all of which last for 1/50th of a second, which is identical to if you shot at 24 frames at 1/50th of a second. So it will look almost identical to if you shot at 24 frames per second. So why bother? Well, because you've shot at 48 frames per second, if you don't want the footage playing back at real time, you can take that 48 frames per second, play it back at 50% speed, and then you've got 50% slow-mo. That 1 second of footage will last 2 seconds on a 24 frames per second timeline, so then you've got some slow motion. So rather than having to change settings while you go, swapping between 24 and 60, swapping ND filters, changing your shutter speeds, you set your FPS once, you set your shutter speed once, you put the ND filter on that you need, and then you just leave it. You film everything at 48 frames per second, and then in post, you can choose to play it back in real speed to look almost identical to 24 frames per second with the same amount of motion blur because you're shooting at the same shutter speed. It'll look basically the same, or you can slow it down to get some 50% slow motion. Job done. Way less hassle. It will save you loads of time, and 99% of your audience won't even be able to tell the difference. Everything you're seeing now is being filmed on the Osmo Pocket at 4K, 48 frames per second. And as you can see, it looks great. I'll do the old wave test. You can see that it looks nice and natural. It's not choppy at all. Looks really good. And I can choose to play this back in real time, which is what I'm doing now, or in slow motion, like so. Now obviously when you slow 48 frames per second down, you're only slowing it down 50%, whereas if you shot at 60 frames per second on a 24 frames per second timeline, you'd be slowing it down 60%. So your slow motion isn't quite as slow, but it's only 10%, so it still looks pretty damn good. But that's really the only downside. And there's some other positives which I didn't mention earlier, and that's that active track still works at 4K 48 frames per second. So at the minute, the Osmo Pocket is tracking my face, which you can't do at 60 frames per second. So the Osmo Pocket is more capable at 48 frames per second than it is at 60. So it's not only more convenient because you don't have to mess around with settings, you just set it once and forget, but you also have more recording options which should help you get even better footage. Now if you're doing that, you will still need ND filters because you'll still need to control your shutter speed. I use these are the Polar Pro Vivid series. I've got an ND4, an ND8 and an ND16. Now the reason I shoot with these is A, they're really great ND filters anyway, but these are also polarized filters, which brings me to tip number 6. Now if you don't know what polarizing filters do, they actually help to cut some of the reflections from your video. Now, when you think reflections, you're probably just thinking of things like water and windows. Now, they obviously reflect the most, but actually almost everything reflects a little bit of light. So if you use a polarizing filter, you can actually make the sky look bluer, greens look greener, water looks a hell of a lot better. Even things like concrete or the ground, the pavement, reflect a surprising amount of light. And if you use a polarizing filter, you can help cut through all of that. It will immediately make your footage look more contrasty, a little bit more saturated. It'll just look a hell of a lot better. You simply slap one on to the front of your Osmo Pocket, point it at the thing you're about to record, rotate the front element until things look a bit better, until you can see it cutting through the reflections, hit record and off you go. Job done. Grab yourself a polarizer and you'll immediately start seeing a difference. And for my last real quick tip, get creative and don't forget to utilize the gimbal on the Osmo Pocket. It's really easy to get into the habit of just shooting this thing like it's a smartphone or like it's an action cam and just pointing and shooting. Make use of that gimbal. Do some cool sweeping or cinematic reveal movement. You can use the gimbal to do some really cool in-camera transitions. My previous video was on how to do exactly that, so click on the link above to watch that. Grab a tripod, or in my case, a dirt cheap monopod, and then you've got yourself a real nice, hugely long extension pole for your Osmo Pocket. Use it to get really high and get some cool angles, or flip it upside down like that. You can get really close to the ground, as I did in one of my previous vlogs where I was messing around on my electric skateboard. Get really close to the ground and get some really cool footage with this thing. Another great one, take it off here, put it on a tripod. You can get some amazingly smooth pans with the Osmo Pocket. Even if your tripod's not that great at panning movements, the Osmo Pocket gimbal will help smooth out any jerkiness, and then you can get some real good product shots, real nice slow panning shots using that gimbal. So get creative, have some fun, and make sure you're really utilising that gimbal on the Osmo Pocket. I hope all that was useful, folks. If it was, give me a thumbs up. If you've got any comments or feedback, shove them down below. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time. Cheerio.